The United Nations Children's Fund says polluted drinking water and the lack of health infrastructure threaten the lives of children in Africa. A new study by UNICEF shows that some 190 million children in 10 African countries are at the highest risk from a convergence of 3 water-related threats. This includes inadequate water, sanitation and hygiene-related diseases. The report further points out that across the 10 hotspots, nearly 1/3 of children do not have access to at least basic water at home, and 2/3 do not have basic sanitation services. 1/4 of children have no choice but to practice open defecation. Hand hygiene is also limited, with 3/4 of children unable to wash their hands because of lack of water and soap at home. The UN body also says that the children, who are mostly under the age of 5, also face a threat from climate hazards. UNICEF insists that investment in solutions is desperately needed to prevent unnecessary deaths among children. Well, we're now joined by Alex Simalabwi, Executive Secretary, Global Water Partnership, Southern Africa, and Director, Continental Africa Water Investment Project, based in Pretoria. Simalabwi is joining us from New York, where he's attending the World Water Week. Mr. Simalabwi, thank you for joining us on the program. UNICEF says that over 190 million children in 10 African countries are at the highest risk from a convergence of 3 water-related threats. What is the situation of water in Africa, and what are organizations like Global Water Partnership doing to tackle the threat?
Thank you very much. Greetings, viewers, wherever you are. I'm Alex from New York, here attending the United Nations conference, the first conference in the last 50 years focused on water at the UN. Now, Africa is running out of time. I think the figures that you've mentioned from UNICEF are actually much higher if you look at how many people don't have access to water and sanitation on the continent. Over 700 million people are estimated not having access to sanitation, and over 300 million are estimated not to have access to clean water. And if you superimpose that with the increasing risk of climate change, Africa as a continent is losing nearly $200 billion a year because of water-related risks that are also because of climate change. Now, what am I doing here at the United Nations UN conference? The African leaders, led by His Excellency President Macky Sall, when he was chair of the African Union last year, launched an international high-level panel on water investments for Africa. The reason? To try and mobilize investments required to close the investment gap for the achievement of SDG 6. It is estimated that at least 30 billion is required just to meet basic access to water and sanitation. And yet the actual investments are between 10 and 19 billion, leaving a significant gap. So the International High-Level Panel, which was established by the African Union, comprises current and heads of states, as well as former heads of state at the African Union level, right. Chaired by President Macky Sall, as well as the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, His Excellency Mark Rutte, who are also convening this important United Nations conference.
All right, so so you've just mentioned that you're in New York to attend the World Water Day. What are some of the key issues being discussed? And you've mentioned that campaign with the high-level panel this week. How important is this, and how will it help tackle the issue of water in Africa?
It's extremely important because to resolve the water crisis in Africa, you need the highest level of political leadership. And to do that, then you need to be able to find where is the funding going to come from. So the high-level panel has prepared a report, how to mobilize 30 billion annually by 2030 that is required. The report has identified what is called the pyramid of transformation, how to mobilize resources, starting with domestic resources, making best of what already exists, fixing the leakages and the wastages and the illegal connections, and also mobilizing institutional domestic and finance institutions from investors within the domestic countries, estimated at almost 11.5 billion just from domestic institutional investors and pension funds in Africa, and also making sure that you're able to do better in accessing global and continental finance. They have identified 5 actions which are going to be presented in the report on Wednesday that is going to be launched to be able to accelerate the access to water and sanitation on the continent and mobilizing the investments. Number one, establishing the highest level of political leadership at the continental level, starting with a committee of heads of states that reports directly to the AU summit on an annual basis on the status of water in Africa and what needs to be done. Number two, enhancing accountability at all levels, mutual accountability by introducing what is called a water investment scorecard, which is going to track the progress in mobilization of investments at country level, the bottlenecks, and the action that needed. Number three, really going after innovative finance to be able to mobilize funding from new and non-traditional sources. Instead of relying on donors all the time, what can Africa do in terms of mobilizing institutional finance? What can Africa do in terms of mobilizing money from the investors that are investing in Africa, the mining company? What can we do from those royalties that countries are doing? Oil and gas industries, what can they do? They are fueling economic growth. They are also at the same time making sure that they are able to pay and reflect the full cost of water in their balance sheets. Number four, what is also needed is forging strong institutional investor and public partnerships, not always relying on the development banks, but also forging strong institutional partnerships with the domestic and international investors. And also finally, number five, using donor money, ODA, as a way of de-risking and bringing down the risks that are required to be able to ensure that you are able to unleash and access the funding that is required from the private sector. This is the 5-action plan that is going to be presented by the high-level panel.